All right, welcome back, guys. We're going to continue with our discussion on immune system. So let's see where we left off. We were talking about the lines of defense, and specifically, we just gave an example as far as like what happens when you puncture and rupture the lines of defense, like the first line of defense, to be more precise. All of this is considered to be non-specific defenses or a innate immunity, as we call it. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the specific defenses or the adaptive immunity, which is what it's more known as. Okay, so specific defenses. Specific defenses are those that give us immunity to certain diseases. So you can thank this for your immunity that we can obtain. In specific defenses, the immune system forms a chemical memory of the invading microbe. If the microbe is encountered again, the body reacts so quickly that few or no symptoms are felt. So I think of it like whenever you visit a place that you've never been, like a new country, a new state, whatever, and you get like a memento, like a little keychain, a sticker, a t-shirt, whatever the case may be. And when you purchase one of these things, you're trying to remind yourself in the future of like your memories there and how much fun you had. So that's kind of the idea here with the immune system. Your immune system holds on to a little bit of that microbe so that the next time you may encounter it, you go through it much quicker, which that's a common misconception here. A lot of people believe that when you have immunity, that means you literally the virus or bacteria never enters your body. Not exactly. Instead, what ends up occurring is that you still get sick, you still get infected with it, but your body just handles it so fast that you never get symptoms or very little symptoms. What are the major players in the immune system? Well, these last three, the T cells, B cells, and antibodies, these guys are the ones that are going to be more responsible for that adaptive immunity or specific defenses that we were just mentioning. Macrophages are more in the lines of like your non-specific defense. They just eat up whatever's in their path. They're phagocytic. So because they're phagocytic, they're just going to try to attack anything that's in their way and eat up what's in their path, right? These guys, though, T cells, B cells, and antibodies are more responsible for your specific defense. So we're going to talk about those in more detail today. A little bit of vocabulary. Antibodies are going to be proteins produced by the human immune system to tag and destroy invasive microbes. They look like a capital Y. You can kind of see it in the next slide coming up. Antibiotics are various chemicals produced by certain soil microbes that are toxic to many bacteria. Some we use as medicine. A lot of antibiotics that we use actually originate from Earth and from nature. So that's a good sign that you don't necessarily need to hyper engineer everything. We do engineer the medicine that we utilize, so we do make it better, but a lot of this stuff comes from Earth. So that's a good sign as far as how we coexist with these bacteria that we live with. And then finally, an antigen. Any protein that our immune system uses to recognize self versus non-self. You can kind of summarize that, honestly, into basically knowing that it is a foreign protein. That's an easier summary, in my opinion. Any foreign protein is just generally speaking going to be an antigen. That's an easy way to remember it. Antibodies. So as I mentioned, they look like these capital Ys. They're made up of protein chains. You have a heavy chain and you have a light chain. You don't need to worry too much about what is the heavy and light chain, but those chains can be reassembled in different ways to make different antibodies. That is very important. I think of it like a Mr. Potato Head. How you can take off the eyes and the ears and the nose and the mouth and like reassemble it in different positions. That's what you can do with antibodies. And when you reassemble an antibody, it can bind to different antigens. Very important as far as how antigens work and how we respond to these foreign proteins. Now, most antibodies are just going to be flowing through your blood. They're just free floating. Some antibodies, however, are directly attached to your cells. So, for instance, they can be attached to B cells. When these cells interact with other microbes, so bacteria, viruses, whatever, they attach to the antigen, and then that alerts the immune system that there's something wrong. There's something there that needs to be addressed. So your cells, they don't have your eyes and ears and your senses or your language, the ability to talk. They don't have that. So your cells need to use proteins and they need to use antibodies to identify that there is a threat, that something is wrong. Now, for all the antigens that are just free floating through your bloodstream, what do? So when they find something that needs to be attacked, They're going to physically attach themselves, as you can see here. They're going to physically attach themselves to a microbe. One antibody doesn't really do much, but then as soon as one has attached itself, it's going to summon the other antibodies in the bloodstream to attach to the microbe, and thus that signals the immune system. It can also signal other immune cells like macrophages that we see here, which are inevitably going to latch on and consume it. So that's what we see. These antibodies are tagging antigens for further immune system analysis and to eventually destroy it. A little bit more about antigens. Cells of the immune system are trained to recognize self proteins versus not self proteins. So, what does that mean? Your immune system is conditioned to identify what cells are good for us and what cells are not, what cells do not belong. So, those are the cells that you want to handle, you want to take care of, and that's what your body does a good job of recognizing. If an antigen protein is encountered by a macrophage, it will bring it to a helper T cell for further identification. We're going to talk about helper Ts in just a second. It's our next slide, after all. If the helper T cell recognizes the protein as an antigen or not self, it will launch an immune response. Very important. So, helper T cells have receptors for recognizing antigens. If they are presented with an antigen, they release cytokines which are going to activate B cells, which that's what the next slide is about. Helper T cells are the key to signaling the immune response, to activating the immune response. So that's very important. If a helper T cell is disabled, as they are in people with AIDS, the immune system will not respond. Later on in this unit, we'll talk about AIDS and HIV and other conditions that can affect the immune system. These are called autoimmune diseases for the most part. The problem with AIDS is not that AIDS itself kills you. It's more that AIDS deactivates your helper T cells. And if it's deactivated, that means the immune response never fully activates. If your immune response never fully activates, someone with AIDS could catch a common cold or flu or strep, and that could kill them. So that's what you have to be very careful with as far as with these severe autoimmune conditions. B cells. All right, B cells are held responsible. What is their main thing? They're going to make antibodies. So they're going to want to make as many antibodies as possible. The B cells that have been covered with antibodies already are able to reproduce rapidly, so they can actually create more of themselves very, very quickly. B cells differentiate into two types of cells. We have plasma cells, and plasma cells are special types of B cells that literally pump out antibodies. They just make a ton of antibodies, and those antibodies are going to float through your bloodstream. Memory cells, on the other hand, are really unique. Memory cells are there to retain the memory of the invader and remain ready to divide if an invasion occurs again. So memory cells purposefully are going to hold on to the information from said invader and just literally be on the ready, just in case another invasion occurs. Very important. A little bit more about antibodies. Antibodies are released into the bloodstream, and they are going to be specific. So what that means is that you have particular antibodies for particular antigens. So for instance, let's say with regards to like COVID, which is obviously the thing that's going on right now in case someone watches this in the future. But with regards to like COVID-19, if you get COVID-19 and you recover from it, you will have antibodies for COVID-19, at least for a period of time. So what that means is that the next time you encounter the virus, your body identifies that virus through your antibodies and can fight it faster. That's the hope. Now, here's something interesting. Antibodies, not only can they tag particular microbes, but they can also disable some microbes. They can actually nullify some microbes from being really potent. They can also cause them to stick together. We talked about this back in circulatory system, agglutination. Agglutination is the process in which things clump up. So it can cause it to clump together. And that clumping together attracts the immune system. It just attracts the immune system to fight. So they tag these microbes so that the microbes are quickly recognized by various white blood cells and eventually destroyed. Killer T cells. So remember how I mentioned how we have helper T cells, how these guys activate the immune system, or the rest of the immune system, right? They activate this adaptive immunity, as we call it. Killer T cells, on the other hand, are going to be the ones that are the ones that get the job done. That's the best way to put it. Some T cells become cytotoxic. Cyto means cell. Toxic literally means poisonous. So these cells have the ability to release these tiny, tiny cytokines or proteins into other cells to kill them. They're very effective, hence why they're called killer T cells. These T cells seek out and destroy any antigens in the system and destroy microbes tagged by antibodies. Very important. So let me go ahead and just underline that right there. Tagged by antibodies. Why am I underlining that? Let me go ahead and charge my computer just in case. Why am I underlining that? So killer T's are not just randomly found in your body. That's what I'm trying to emphasize. They're not like neutrophils. They're not like basophils, eosinophils, macrophages, all these other cells that we've talked about in the past. Killer T cells are activated because they've been given a mission. They find a cell that has a ton of antibodies and then they go out and hunt it down. I think of them like Navy SEALs. You don't see Navy SEALs patrolling the streets, right? Navy SEALs are given a mission, they're very highly specialized, and they go out and do their job, similar to killer T cells. Some killer T cells, or cytotoxic T cells, as we call them, can recognize and destroy cancer cells. I've mentioned this previously. Most people will encounter cancer at some point in their lives. The hope, though, is that your killer T cells destroy the cancer cells before they become problematic. Unfortunately, some people have cancer cells that grow to a point that your body can't keep up with it. And then that's when you may be diagnosed as having cancer, and then you may need further treatment beyond that. This is a great slide. I think this is an amazing job of just summarizing a lot of what we've been discussing as far as the specific defenses, right? So all of this has to do with your specific defenses, or it's also referred to as your adaptive immunity. Either or. Adaptive immunity or your specific defenses. A little messy, but it's okay. There you go. So what this shows us is like, let's say you get a virus, right? And a virus is trying to harm you. The virus itself will enter in your body and flow through your bloodstream as it tries to infect other cells. If it runs into a macrophage, the macrophage is going to engulf the whole thing and send it to the helper T. Helper T is going to scan it, and it's going to send some of its components to a B cell. The B cell can then tell the plasma B cells, hey, make a ton of antibodies because we likely have a viral infection right now. And it's going to check with the memory B cells in case you've seen this before. If you've seen this before, then you can handle it much faster. The helper T is then going to send parts of the virus also to the killer Ts, or the cytotoxic T cells, as we call it. The killer Ts are then going to be told, hey, we have a virus in here and we got to start killing. So that's what we observe. Some of the viruses will just go straight to B cells, which the antibodies can bind to them and then can stick them and keep them in place. Some of the viruses will do their job and infect other cells, but then the killer Ts are going to do a good job of destroying them. So all of this is the process of adaptive immunity. This is how our body really takes care of business when you are sick. Granted, this takes time. When you're sick, it's not like the next day your adaptive immunity kicks in and you're perfect. It typically takes a couple days depending on how serious the illness is. That said, if it's something you've run into before and your body picks it up on the B cells and then sends it to a memory cell and says, hey, have we seen this before? And it says yes, there's a good chance you're only going to be sick for like less than a day, and you probably won't even feel symptoms, which works out really well. Okay. Next, calling a halt. When the invader is destroyed, the helper T cell has to tell everything to shut down. That is very important. Very important. Memory T cells, we're not going to talk too much about that, honestly, in this particular unit. I'll talk about it since it's here, right? Memory T cells are formed, which can then quickly divide and produce more killer T cells to quickly fight off the invader if it is encountered again in the future. I'm more focused on the memory B cells because those are the ones that are really important for immunity, but memory T cells are similar. They just make killer Ts really quickly if you need them. Now, back to the helper T cell. Remember how we said helper T cells start the immune process or the immune response? Helper Ts also end the immune response. That's important. When you're sick, you expect your immune system to obviously work for you and help you out. But the problem is, if your immune system just goes on rampage and just does whatever it needs to do, eventually there's going to be casualties and there will be friendly fire. So there can be circumstances where your immune cells start to overreact and can actually harm you. So with regards to COVID, for instance, yes, it is a respiratory disease, a respiratory virus, and it harms your lungs. But when your immune system fights it, sometimes the immune system fights so hard because it's really trying to eradicate it as much as possible that it can cause scarring. It can cause scar tissue of the lungs, and specifically in the bronchi and the alveoli. So we have to be careful with how far the immune system can go, which is why having this helper T cells to stop all of this is a good sign. You want that to happen when the invasion or when the infection is over. Okay, so that's where we're going to finish for today. Not bad. Like I said, we're making good progress. There's nothing really to rush through this particular unit, so we're taking our time with this stuff. All right. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I will see you on the next one.